Hey, it's John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and it's the Entrepreneurial You, the show for dedicated and passionate Caribbean entrepreneurs seeking daily inspiration, brought to you by author, speaker, and award-winning entrepreneur Heneka Watkis-Porter. You must be prepared to ignite.
In January of 2016, on Twitter, I had 406 followers. Instagram, I had 2,107, and Facebook, I had 854. Now, after doing this podcast since 2016, I'm now verified on Twitter, and I have 900,000 followers there. I have 30,700 on Instagram and 35,593 on Twitter. So that can all be done, by doing a podcast and using it as a branding play in the right way. Like, I literally had nothing when I started.
Hi, this is Heneka. I'm so glad you took the time to stop by today. In Jamaican parlance, Wagwan. I'm glad to say it there. This episode is sponsored by HenekaWatkis-Porter.com as well as the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Now, on HenekaWatkis-Porter.com, you can visit us for blogs, resources, books, online podcast courses, podcasts, and more. If you are new to the Entrepreneurial You podcast, be sure to check out past episodes with guests such as John Lee Dumas, Patrice Washington, Seth Godin, Richard Branson, Amy Porterfield, and a host of other game changers.
We needed to raise capital, but our experience with local financial institutions was that they were cautious and slow to act, and interest rates were far too high. We had real concerns about financing our business through outside equity investors and the possibility of interference. Could we get a fair valuation for our business? We had our own ideas about the business and its value. Should I go the traditional route of bank financing, or should I try the Jamaica Stock Exchange? So we made a call and experienced transformation of our business through conversations. I'm John Mahfood, CEO of Jamaican Teas, and we're listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
Give us a call today at 876-967-3271 to begin your transformation through conversation. We want to see your company listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange.
And now, here's today's episode. The most talented, thought-provoking, game-changing people are never normal. Richard Branson. Hey, my peak performer, how are you doing today? I trust that you're really doing well, because I am, and I like to know that you're doing great. I am in a good place, and I trust that you are too. So it's episode 160 of the Entrepreneurial You podcast. I'm your host, Heneka Watkis-Porter. Today, we will hear from Jeremy Slate. Now, Jeremy is the founder of the Create Your Own Life podcast, which studies the highest performers in the world. He studied literature at Oxford University, specializes in using podcasting and new media to create celebrity, and was ranked number one in iTunes New and Noteworthy, and 78 in the iTunes Top 100. He was named also the number one podcast to listen to by Inc. magazine in 2019, as well as being named a top influencer by Forbes. Today, our conversation will zooming on how brands can utilize the $1 billion podcast market. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm just really stoked to have a chance to share some value with your audience today.
Absolutely. Now, do you have any Jamaican friends?
I have one Jamaican friend, my friend Ann Thornley Brown. That's about it.
Okay. Well, one is enough because we're a lot, We are a lot. I don't know how much of us you can handle, right? All right. So we are going to move into how brands can utilize the $1 billion podcast market. Now, let's begin at the beginning, right? Let's talk about the size of the podcast industry. You're talking about it being $1 billion podcast market, but really, how big is it? Put that into perspective for us.
So we haven't quite crossed over that 1 billion number yet. It's going to be at some point this year that's going to happen. We're pretty darn close, and I'm talking about 1 billion in terms of advertising dollars spent. But in terms of the market, I think about – it was actually last Thursday. Last Thursday, we crossed 900,000 shows in Apple Podcasts. So 900,000. And the cool thing about that is being under 1 million, it just shows how big of an opportunity out there, because there's millions of blogs and there's under 1 million podcasts. So that's a huge opportunity for people that want to get into the space. And to even kind of pull back from that a little further, if we take a look at that 900,000 number, that's just shows with feeds in Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever it may be. But only 18% of those are shows that, produce an episode at least every 2 weeks. So we consider those to be active shows. So the cool thing about that is there's very little for you to cut through to get noticed, get attention, start to build an audience, and really start to grow your brand online.
That's amazing, because yes, I actually follow Daniel J. Lewis as well. I like when he comes out with these reports and stuff. So
he's incredible.
Yes, he is, and he's doing a great job. Just keeping us in the know where that is concerned. But what is startling, and you're talking about, is that 18%? You said how much is it that is actually updated frequently? Right.
That was a number I got in December. So I haven't checked since then, but I imagine it hasn't changed that much since December.
Exactly. It's just a small amount. So imagine you have, let's round it off for ease of calculation, right? So let's round it off at a million podcasts there, which we're getting to that number pretty close anyway. And you recognize that from that 1 million podcasts that are there, that are, listed. And it could be that, because argument is if somebody's testing a podcast and it's 3 seconds long, it's also calculated in that figure as well. So let's talk about the fact that it's only 1% perhaps that is being uploaded on a frequent basis, or maybe 10%. 10% that is updated frequently. Why do you think that is happening? Outside of the fact that people are testing podcasts and it's just there and it's also calculated in that figure. But outside of those, let's eliminate those. Why do you think that people are starting, but at the same time, they're not following through, to maintain their podcast episodes, on a frequent basis?
Well, I think the actual problem is literally one word that you just said, and that's the word testing. There's too many people that want to jump in and just, maybe they're successful on another platform, or maybe they're like I was when I jumped into this in 2014, and I thought I was going to be like an advertising gazillionaire when I first jumped into podcasting. And I realized that for most of us, that's not the value initially, but that's the dream we're sold, right? So you need to find out what that value is. And for me, I see it as a branding value, because I was able to create a brand from nothing. Like I literally had, I think, 200 followers on Instagram when I started this, and now I'm over 30,000. And in terms of the networking, the people you can connect with is incredible. And as you start to build an audience, you're advertising.
1 second, Jeremy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you get into the branding part, because I really want to focus on that a whole lot, right? Let's talk about that dream that you actually mentioned. You were alluding to the fact that we're sold this dream initially. Get into podcasting and you become a trillionaire, perhaps. I mean, nobody's saying that, but I don't think
it's just podcasting. I think it's it's people that think they're going to get the magical internet money, and they think it's they're going to get all these YouTube views, and then they're going to get advertising from YouTube, and they're going to put out a landing page, but then they didn't realize that they get traffic to that landing page, and they're going to sell all this stuff. So I think first and foremost, when any person jumps online for the first time, there's this idea that it's going to be extremely easy. And for some, it may be. It can happen that way in a perfect storm circumstance. But I usually tell people with a podcast, and it's funny because I'm hearing a lot of other influencers actually agreeing with this now. I know Lewis Howes did an episode about a month ago where he talked about this. Commit to your podcast for a year. Commit to doing this for a year, whether it makes you money or not. Try to figure out so it doesn't lose you money. But commit to it for a year as a vehicle to really get some content out there and really get attention and get noticed. Because too many people do this thing called pod fading. They put out around 20 episodes, either a little bit less or a little bit more, and they didn't make the magical internet money yet, and they kind of quit because they see all these slick advertisements, and they see other podcasts that have made money, but they find out that they started in 2012. So it really is – people are sold a dream rather than realizing it's the hard work they're going to have to do to make it happen. And, it comes down to them to make it go right.
Talk about the hard work, because I mean, personally, I started in 2017. It's now 2020, and believe me, I can understand completely well why persons get into this phase of pod fade, right? I totally get it, because if I were not this, personality type with being resilient and committed, and once I say I'm doing something, I'm doing it kind of a thing, then I would have faded a long time ago, because there are times when if I'm not properly structured, and that's the way. Well, let me not allude to that. Let me ask you, how do you avoid the pod fade? For me, I know that I have to be committed and structured and all of that. How do you avoid it, and how can you encourage others not to fall into, I start by week 5 I'm out?
Well, I think it actually goes back to the thing you said there, and that's structure. You know what I mean? I have a running content calendar that I've had since day one, where right now, and I know you told me before this interview, like, when my episode's going to publish, so I'm sure you have this as well. But I know through May, what episodes are coming out and when they're coming out, and it's all planned, and all the files are put away in a place that my team can work on, or whatever it may be. So number one, it's planning. Number two, it's people aren't really taking responsibility for putting systems behind it. And what I mean is, I'm interviewing for a new editor, because we had a little bit of turnover here on my side. And it's pretty easy for me to onboard a new editor, because everything that I'm going to do around my show is written down in a Google Doc. And I also use Loom to screen record it and make it into a video so it's kind of like a video with me narrating me doing the process. So it's very easy to then hand that over to people. But I think way too often somebody says, okay, start a podcast. Okay, well, who am I going to go find to edit it? Oh my gosh, it's $200 an episode to edit. Okay, let's do it. Oh my gosh, this podcast is costing me so much money. So they haven't found out how to build systems around it, how to outsource, and how to get the right kind of help. Like, early on, I had interns helping me with the podcast, which means they get college credit for helping me with editing the podcast, and it wasn't any money out of my pocket right away. So I think far too often it's a lack of planning, putting out too much money in the wrong areas in the wrong ways, and just kind of not strategy and like why you're even doing this. Like, I was talking to a friend the other day. He's like, well, I've been doing pretty well doing 2 episodes a week. I'm considering doing 5. And I kind of gave him my horror story on doing 5. Like, I got tired of doing interviews. You have to then book so much content out there. And sometimes you're saying yes to interviews you don't really want to do because you need to fill the space. And it burns you out. So you need to find out what works for you. For me, it's 3 episodes a week. I think most people should be able to, if they're really going to do this as a brand building thing, be able to manage 2 a week. But you need to, I guess, manage your expectations, build some systems, and figure out how to spend your money smartly, because you're going to be spending a little bit to make this go right.
Mm-hmm. And you know what is true? Because when you start something, for the first time, you're so excited about it, and your adrenaline is pumping, and so you're encouraged to go on and so on. For me, I remember when I just started, I had so many episodes in the back, like almost up to a year.
Wow.
Yes, almost up to a year. And I was so tempted to, instead of doing once weekly, to now publish 3 episodes or 2 episodes per week. And I remember throwing it out to my community, and they were like, no, they like the 1 week, because now it's going to them, they're going to feel like they have to listen to all of it, and it's going to be a little too much for them. Thank God I put that question out there, because had I not done that, I would have started something that I clearly, right now where I'm at, could not maintain.
Well, here's a great example of that too. So I made a show change in July of last year, and I did it for about a month, and I was so excited for it. I was going down to 1 interview a week, and then Friday what I was doing is grabbing the most powerful segments from that interview and making a clip show. I got feedback from my audience like, wow, I absolutely hate this. So I think sometimes we have to kind of make sure that our audience is getting what they want, and not just what we think they want. And that's why it should be a 2-way communication.
Absolutely. Now let's come back to the podcast market and so on. Who are some of, in your mind, not in your mind, based on what is out there, the major players that are capitalizing on the opportunity that this podcasting industry is providing?
Well, I think we have kind of like different categories of players, right? Like, we have kind of the more independents, where we have Joe Rogan out there, we have Tim Ferriss out there. We have, a lot of shows similar to that, Brad Lee, and there are people that have kind of gotten very large in the space, but they've done it in a more independent fashion, right? But then if you look at the other side of it, we have some bigger players in the space that are trying to do this more like radio or TV or something like that. And then we're taking a look at, places like Wondery and Parcast, and I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like USA Today is doing a lot of this. So a lot of the big brands are kind of jumping in, and at the same time trying to build networks like they have in other places. And on the outside, it seems like it's working. I would just wonder with how many shows they're launching, how quickly, like what their profitability ratio is like, because that's a lot of that isn't published. But really, you have a bunch of your few big independent players, and then you have the big brands that were kind of successful in other places and maybe have new names, and like iHeartRadio, and they're trying to take over the podcast space. So you have this independent area, and then you also have this big brand area.
All right. Touching a little on somewhere that it's not necessarily where we want to go, but we should go. What are your What are your thoughts on all these big brands? And I'm linking that now to the recently announced podcast academy. And I need to know your take on that. And what do you think about all these big players that seem, independents are saying that, hey, you're here to kind of push us out of the space that we created. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a bit ridiculous. Do you remember the iHeartRadio awards that came out, right? That was, I think, last year or something like that for podcasts. And they're like the first podcast awards. What about the one that's been around for 10 years? And they just gave awards to like all their friends and all the people on iHeartRadio. It's kind of like, well, what about the people that created this space? So I think at some point you have to understand what's already there and figure out how you can interact with it. And I actually don't think a lot of these big brands have done a great job with that. They've just kind of plowed their way in. And there's a billboard. I'm in New York City a lot. And there's a billboard right by 125th in Harlem. And it's an iHeartRadio board, and it says America's #1 podcaster. And I'm like, according to who?
Yes.
So I think they could do a better job in doing that. Now, here's the thing I'll say is I actually think one of the ones that's doing a better job at it is Wondery. I know Lewis Howe has actually just signed on to be part of their network now and start publishing his show through Wondery's network and some sort of partnership there. And I listen to a lot of their shows. Like, their show content is really, really great. But I think, honestly, if I had to look at it, I think iHeartRadio is one of the ones that just has not done the best job in acknowledging what's already there. And I do think Wondery has done a substantially better job at that.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually looking on, and I want to agree with you for real. I think, for example, based on podcasts, conferences that I've been to, iHeartRadio kind of have a nice little branding where they throw nice parties, right? And so it's a way of selling you an image that, it's not necessarily there. It doesn't translate into, for the independents that, I am with you, right? So all of these political things going on, it happens in radio, it happens in TV. And so it's as if it's crossing over into the podcast industry, and we have to be so vigilant to make our voices be heard. And let's keep our eyes out to what will happen for the podcast academy. Now, we digress a little, although it's quite relevant.
Well, can I just add to that real quick? Because
Sure.
I think a lot of people don't realize, like, iHeartRadio is owned by iHeartMedia, which is a company that was Clear Channel Broadcasting. So it's basically the big radio people realizing that radio is just not doing so well. So like, all right, this new space is coming out, we need to jump on it. So I think at the same time, you call something a new name and you try and convince people it's something that it's not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the transparency, how transparent it is. And we want to make sure, because from what I know of the industry from the ground up, not necessarily from the top down, from the ground up, it's a space that, everybody is on the same, wavelength, the same playing field.
Right. It's
leveled. It's oneness, it's community. And so money is power. And where there is money, there tends to be a little, and I don't want to knock money, because we need money, and money's not a bad thing, right?
I love money in the right ways.
Absolutely. It's the use of money and how and the motive behind the spend. So we have to, as independents, be very vigilant and make sure that we protect the space, because it's one that I will always advocate for, and especially in Jamaica, where I always say that there is this classism kind of a culture, where you get the "do you know who I am" kind of an attitude. When I am relating, like I can get a Seth Godin on my podcast, for example, and I don't have that barrier of "do you know who I am," kind of a mentality. So we have to protect the space, definitely. We move on, Jeremy. Interesting take. I mean, it's all related to the industry, and it's important that we talk about it, right? And where's to talk about it than on a podcast, yeah? So,
right.
All right, let's talk about what you started to dive into, because I know it is something that interests you, and it interests me as much as it does you, because I just put out a book too called Podcast Power, and with emphasis on not just how to start and why it is important and all of that, but all of the benefits that can be gleaned, that you can leverage by having a podcast. So you started, and because I want that to be, to be our final segment, or, and spend a little more time on that, I want you now to share. You mentioned that you started like with 200 initially followers. Is it on Instagram? And no,
yeah. So here I have this written down somewhere. I can actually give you the exact number, because I was putting together a talk for the end of this month last night.
Yes.
So here I'll give you the exact numbers. In January of 2016, on Twitter I had 406 followers, Instagram I had 2,107, and Facebook I had 854. Now, after doing this podcast since 2016, my current numbers on those platforms are I'm now verified on Twitter, and I have 900,000 followers there. I have 30,700 on Instagram and 35,593 on Twitter.
Okay.
So that can all be done, by doing a podcast and using it as a branding play in the right way. Like, I literally had nothing when I started.
Mm-hmm. All right. So interesting. And I'm glad that you had, the specific stats to be the basis of this conversation. So, what attributes in your mind? Yes, you have a podcast, but tell us about how you've been leveraging that podcast for brand presence and, brand growth and all of that, market penetration.
Well, so I think first and foremost, it's that commitment I was talking about, like committing to doing this for a year and not doing like 10 episodes and then it doesn't work out. And you're like, oh, I'll go do blogging. Like, I'll go do something else. You have to commit to it. And I think the other thing is, people don't realize the branding aspects of this, right? Like, if you do a really great job with the visuals and, the audio editing and these things, so that, number one, it's listenable and it breaks the barrier that people see something new and they don't quite understand it, and it makes them more comfortable with it. So you get that out of the way. But then there's also the ability to talk to, you mentioned Seth Godin, talk to a lot of high level guests that wouldn't give me the time of day if I didn't have a podcast or a platform to be able to do that with. So now I'm closing in on 700 interviews, and it's helped me to talk to so many incredible people. But then what's come out of that is, I've been on hundreds of podcasts. I've been featured in major media because of it. I've spoken all over the world because of it. And these are things that just wouldn't be opportunities that would happen for me, without a podcast. And then honestly, I had tried a bunch of different businesses that didn't really work out. And at that point in time, I had people start asking me for help, and we actually founded a PR firm called Command Your Brand Media towards the end of 2016, and we've helped hundreds of people get on top-rated podcasts, tell their story, and really learn how to repurpose content the right way. So none of this would have been possible, and my life is in a totally different direction, all because I took podcasting seriously and really tried to build a brand around that.
Mm-hmm. As you talk about, all because you have a podcast, I'm here sitting down and, talking to you, and I'm thinking to myself, it's pretty much the same path, that many of us as podcasters have been treading. No, I started out in traditional radio. And even as I'm having this conversation with you, I'm saying to myself that I could not lead with that. Like, the impact I'm having and the opportunities that are coming my way from my brand and platforms that I've been given, there is absolutely no way that I could lead with, say, to somebody and to all these, partners that, hey, I have a radio show. Let's think. It's like the impact of saying I have a podcast and here's what I'm doing with a podcast is so much different than, oh, I'm doing this show on radio and here is what I'm doing. I think the impact of it is way more, because one, I think a lot of people get it, about the ability of a podcast. So a radio show, for example, once you miss it unless you had somebody record it, right? The fact that podcasts are evergreen, it creates so much opportunity. So talk to us about podcasts being evergreen and the opportunity that is, it can afford us as a result of that.
Well, and I'll even go back to, we're comparing to radio here. Radio for like statistics, a lot of them, not all of them, use something called the diary method, where they find a certain number of people in a city, they get them to do a survey of what their radio listening is, and they multiply that by the whole of the population. So when you know that, you're kind of like scared, like, wait, that's how they got their numbers? And the difference is, like, with podcasting, like, as a host, I actually see like who downloaded me and, what part of the world are they in and things like that. We actually have some hard numbers. Now, not everybody's putting those numbers out there publicly, but you do have the charts in different places like chartable.com, which are actually ranking them based on reviews, downloads, and subscribes. So we have an idea of actually what's listening based on some hard numbers. I've gotten business off episodes that were like 3 years old. I was on Entrepreneur on Fire in 2017. I still get people contacting me
JLD,
about
my
that interview.
guy. Sorry, I have to support and show JLD. Yeah, he was on my show too. He does my audio bump and all of that stuff. So yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, I was on Entrepreneur on Fire as a guest back in 2017, and I still get leads from that interview. Like, it's pretty incredible that that's out there. And here's the thing too that I think a lot of people don't think about, right? And this is just search engine optimization is just something I'm a nerd about and I really love. A lot of these places you host your podcasts, like the places that hold your files, so like Libsyn, Podbean, and some of these other sites out there, but those are the two major ones that come to mind. They're what's called a high authority score site, which means on a scale of 1 to 100, they're somewhere in the 90s. So when they link to your website, which they do every single episode you publish, you get a high authority score backlink to your website, which really helps you for search engine optimization. So that's kind of the incredible thing about podcasting is it's evergreen content. People are hearing you and building a relationship with you. But then there's this, because it's online, this incredible, search engine optimization juice that you're getting to your website so more people can find you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So again, coming back to our branding opportunities, because we are about to wrap, Jeremy.
Sure.
Such an interesting discussion. Now, talk to us more about the branding opportunities that you've been afforded, and even some of the opportunities that you think people are missing out on as a result of not taking on the industry, being a part of the industry.
Sure. Well, I think too many people tie it to. I know we've talked about the $1 billion advertising market that it's becoming, but I feel like too many people have tied it to just advertising dollars, and they look at, well, my podcast isn't making me any advertising dollars. And, it really needs to be built into your business in a way that it can get you leads, it can get you attention. Like a lot of the PR that we've gotten for our company, I've gotten through my podcast. I've gotten featured in Forbes and Inc. and these different things. And because I've gotten more visibility from the podcast, I've gotten invited to speak on some incredible stages. I'm kind of bummed. I was supposed to speak in Thailand this month, but because of this whole coronavirus thing, it's been put on hold, and I don't know when it's going to be rescheduled, but I'm getting stages all over the world. I spoke in Kiev, Ukraine last year from having a podcast, and these are just opportunities that would not happen if I didn't use that as a real brand building element, which to flow more power to my business.
Mm-hmm. And absolutely, I can totally attest to the speaking opportunities. 3, in fact, at the time of recording, by tomorrow, I'm actually going to Orlando for Podfest, and I was at
cool.
Podcast Movement speaking. So spoken at 3 events in the U.S. so far, as a result of the podcast, right? Power to me, power to all of us that have a podcast, power to, to those that will start their podcast and will leverage it to build their brand. So, so much opportunities, and it just cannot be looked at in terms of the direct monetization, as you've been mentioning, Jeremy. It's about, the indirect benefits of partnerships with people. Like, for example, I host LeaderCast events in Jamaica, and I've been doing that since 2008. On May 7 will be my 5th event, and it's all because I lead with, I have a podcast. This is what I'm doing. This is where I'm headed in terms of my brand. No, Patrice Washington is coming down, that I met her through Podcast Movement last year. So all of these and several other opportunities, right? It's just limitless. Doing coaching, mastermind, selling products, selling services, right? So just so many things that many people are not taking advantage of. But it's growing. So we have hope, Jeremy, that it's a growing industry. And people like yourself and you and I, we have seen the light, and others have seen the light, and others will come to see the light.
I agree 100%. It's kind of the future of where things are going, and you're seeing a lot of even connected devices and cars and everything else going towards having podcasting. So I just think our reach in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be incredible.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing of what, the things that we can accomplish. I love the internet. I love the age that we're now living in. Just everything is possible. All right. We've had an interesting, enlightening and spirited, discussion about podcasting and the industry and the opportunities that are available. Jeremy, I know that, persons want to hear more from you. And so I'm going to ask you to, one, share your contact information, leave that with our community, but also share with us the freebie that you have that you did mention that you have a giveaway for our community. So go right ahead.
Sure. So I am at Jeremy Ryan Slate on all platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, any of those. But I put together a really awesome training for your audience because, we talked about big brands and how they're competing and how they're trying to jump in on podcasting. And honestly, small brands can compete just like them and even better because, you don't have to throw around a budget like they do and things like that. So I put together an awesome training for your audiences over at commandyourbrand.com/free training. It's about 35 minutes. It's going to be the best time that you have ever spent to really get your brand going in the right direction and start growing.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy Slate. It has been an awesome pleasure having this conversation with you. I know you shared value and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, my peak performer, for tuning in to this episode with Jeremy Slate. I absolutely look forward to connecting with you next week, where we'll have another interesting guest to bring you value to get you leveling up. All right. In the meantime, though, I've been talking about my new book, Podcast Power, the quick start guide to launching and leveling up your brand. You can get it on Amazon or on my website. A nice link I've created for you, so it's easy for you to find it. bit.ly/purchase podcast power. That's bit.ly/purchase podcast power. Remember, you were born to win, but to be a winner, you must plan to win, prepare to win, and expect to win. What good? And thank you.